Good afternoon, everyone, and good Shabbos. After a very yummy Kiddush, thank you, Jill, Teresa, Lindsay, everyone. We want to invite those people who were with us on the Israel trip to come and sit on our panel. Hi, Kim. Hi, Talia. And we want to invite anyone who's over in the Kiddush section to feel free to bring whatever you're eating or drinking over into this part of the room. We'd be honored to have you here. And in just a moment, we're going to begin our panel. And I'm going to ask anyone who was with us on our Israel trip to come on forward as we do that. So what we really wanted to do today as people make their way over is we really had three purposes to our recent Israel trip. We had three different objectives. Suze, you have to Okay. I feel like we should have Julia here. So our three objectives to our Israel trip were these. One, we wanted to go and to show our support. That was our first objective, to make sure that the people of Israel knew that Jews around the world were with them and thinking of them, and we wanted to show our solidarity and support. The second thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to help out in any way that we could and to bear witness. So bearing witness meant listening to people's stories, to gathering those stories, to making their stories our stories. And the third thing we wanted to do was we wanted to bring their stories and their experiences home with us so that we could really serve as ambassadors of the people of Israel. And so I just want to say that for everyone here and those who aren't here but were with us in Israel, it was such a privilege to be there together. And I imagine that for all of us, you know, we put our heads down at night and we think of what we heard and what we saw and what we experienced, and probably at times throughout the days, we're holding on to that experience, still processing a lot of it, and incredibly grateful that we were there. So I feel like we could do if Amanda were here, I would say like we could start 1, 2, 3, which is our way of making sure we were all together. So, but instead, I'd love to just start this panel by asking people that were there, and we're going to have a whole bunch of questions, so answer whichever ones you choose. But just to start with, what was it that inspired you to sign up, to go to Israel at this time, which wasn't an easy time, without a lot of lead time, to just say, like, I'm in? And anyone, feel free to take it, and I'll pass it. Rita. Rita is number 9.
And I'm also the oldest one, the one on the trip.
How old are you, Rita?
I'm sorry?
How old are you?
How old am I? Oh, gosh.
Because it will inspire other people.
I'm 81. And it was very important for me at this stage in life to go back to Israel. I haven't been there for 14 years. And I had to prove to myself that I could do it. That I could do it. And I thought, as soon as the notification came out, I'm going. And it was important to see and lend my voice to those who don't have a voice right now. And I'm sitting with people that are absolutely phenomenal. And that's why I went. It was time, and I wanted to go. And I thank everybody that's up here because they were absolutely fantastic to me, and that's why I went. I mean, I'm number 9 on the bus. But
Thanks, Rita. Anyone else? Yeah, Lisa. Yep.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Is it on? Good morning. Well, my husband and I were with our family on a civil rights vacation, going across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and seeing that side of American history and how people stood up for civil rights and for things that were important to them. And we got the email about the trip, and we were in, I think, were we in the Freedom Riders Museum?
I think we were on our way to the Freedom Riders.
Okay. And literally,
Early in the morning.
we were literally on this trip. We had no passports, no information, no anything. And literally, I was on the phone with Jeremy saying, how can we sign up for this? Because I think we both just felt that as Jewish people that we wanted to show up for our people, and felt that very inspired by that, in the civil rights movement in the South. And of course, at that time, we definitely made sure over the holidays to tell people that we were Jewish, because I think we all know that, various communities have a narrative that may not really be true. So we also wanted to dispel some of those myths while we were there.
And this is Lisa Radoff and Jay Radoff. What number are you? They want to know, Lise.
A dozen. I'm 12.
She's 12. Okay, anyone else want to, anything special motivate you to say yes? Okay. Want to save it? Okay. So I'm going to move to the next question, which is this. There were a lot of things that we did during our 4 days on the ground in Israel. I feel like we sort of packed weeks into days. And so I just want to ask different people to talk about one experience that you had that was particularly moving to you. Josh.
My name is Josh Shine, number 14, which I didn't always remember, but I tried to. So I think the trip, for many of us, I think we each took away a lot of specific, stronger points, although all of it was very strong, very emotional, very difficult, but also very inspiring. I think for me, when we visited the kibbutz Kfar Aza, I think seeing evil in the world and evil from humanity so close. You see on TV or on social media a picture of maybe a burned out house or a crime, or what we've seen from pictures and images from 10/7. It is so much more difficult to see it in person, to see a burned out room, a burned out building, a destroyed building, where you know people were murdered, where you know people were raped, gang raped, genitals mutilated. I'm sorry to be graphic, but this is what we saw firsthand. Where this all happened and stories of how this happened. Rooms we went in on this kibbutz, the one room we were able to enter, most of them are blocked off, but you can see in it. Bullet holes all over the room, shrapnel from a grenade that had exploded. The door that a young couple, I think they're 19, maybe years old, were trying to hold closed while the terrorists were coming into them. There's text messages they blew up onto a poster now for people that are coming there. And the daughter and her boyfriend are reaching out to her dad, texting. They're here. We're trying to keep them at bay. You see the text exchange, and then, of course, his final text saying, "Are you there? Are you there? Please respond." They both got murdered there. We could still see some of the furniture left in that room with blood on it, I assume from having been raped before she was murdered. Extremely difficult to see firsthand, extremely difficult to sit and walk in a room where a human being did that to another human being, and to question and wonder why and how any human being could do that to any human being. And why, and I'll end here, there's a lot of other things to say, why the world did and continues to turn its back on the realities of what happened to the Jewish people, to men, women, and children, but to the women with the sexual violence. I cannot comprehend, and we met with people who spoke about that, and some other people can mention that, how the entire world has turned their back on us.
I'll kind of continue what you were saying. On day 4, we heard from Dr. Kochav El Levy, I'm reading here just so I get it right. She's the chair of the Civil Commission on October 7th Crimes by Hamas Against Women and Children and the founding head of the Institute for Gender and Sustainability. So she is an expert in her field on women's rights. And she has a lot of international colleagues that she collaborates with, for years on these academic issues. And then when it became a reality on October 7th, she was asked to compile evidence to make sure that the world is aware of these things. And one of the most memorable parts, I think, for a lot of us is hearing her describe that when she presented these things to her colleagues from the UN Women's Council and these various organizations, she was not met with the kind of acceptance that she would expect from a person of her stature. She was told that she doesn't have enough evidence, or that this is not something that is really important to the world to know. And just hearing her speak about how these atrocities are just not considered important enough, or not considered even valid to be considered, was just so powerful for us to hear, and one of the main reasons why we came to Israel, to hear these things and memorialize them and make sure that they are remembered by everyone.
So my name is Rebecca Fruman, number 8, right in the middle. I would say that everyone we met will absolutely stay with myself and with all of us. Their stories of bravery and survival and loss. But the morning that was the most difficult, I think, for a lot of us, was when we went to the south, and when we pulled up to the Nova Festival site. And there were other buses there at the same time. There were hundreds of IDF soldiers who were about to go into Gaza, who were visiting and learning about what had happened there. And then when we walked up, and let me just preface it by saying, you can hear the bombing in Gaza when you're there. You can actually hear it. It sounds like thunder in the background. And when we got there, and there are these beautiful pictures of these beautiful young people, 20s, 30s, who just were there for a music festival to dance and to sing and to celebrate. And their families had been there the day before planting trees for Tu B'Shvat. So we saw that in the distance. But to see these memorials of the people that were murdered there or kidnapped with their personal items from their families, decorated just so beautifully to remember them. So I will forever remember their faces. We will carry their stories. And traveling with the people that we did, and our rabbis, and Ben, and Amanda, we all stood together and we said the Kaddish. And it was just the most moving moment for me on that morning. And then as we're driving out, you see all these beautiful red flowers, these wild flowers that were blooming, and you felt the hope, and you felt the way to move forward. And so that was just something that I will forever take with me.
My name is Jay Radov. I'm number 13. I agree with what Kimberly just said. Going to the Nova Music Festival was the most emotional for me for a number of reasons. And the difference is, I think Josh said, between seeing something on TV and being there in person is geometrically different. Nova was not only powerful because they had pictures of everyone, each one of the 365 people who were murdered that day, colored pictures with their smiling faces. And then 50 yards away, there were a couple hundred Israeli soldiers that Kimberly mentioned who were actually staging for going back into Gaza. They were staying in that area and then sleeping there and then going in the next morning, every morning. the contrast between the Israeli soldiers on the one hand, 50 yards away from where all these memorials were, was jarring. And I just want to say two things. My wife, Lisa, went up to one of the soldiers and said, thank you. She went by herself, and he put his arm around her and thanked her. It was a very emotional moment, and give a lot of credit to my wife. And as Josh said beautifully on the restaurant at the closing dinner, we here in Baltimore and in the United States are very comfortable. And the people of Israel are so resilient. And it's easy to get lost in what the comforts we have and the resiliency and the difficulties that they have. When I was at Nova, I thought, we have 4 children, ranging from 26 to 32. Any one of those 4 could have been at that music festival, and any one of those 4 could have been in the Army. And it was an experience that was incredibly emotional. And I actually was not able to say Kaddish. I was too emotional at the end.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Ben specifically if you can talk a little bit about our time at Har Herzl's.
So for those of you who don't know, Har Herzl is Israel's national military cemetery. Every time I visit Israel, I have to visit Har Herzl for 2 reasons. One, it is where Theodor Herzl is buried, and as a committed Zionist, it's always important for me to visit his grave, and also Jabotinsky, who's nearby. But also I have a couple of friends who are buried there, and usually I like to visit them when I go. Har Herzl was not originally on our itinerary, but we were able to put it on our itinerary because we were fortunate enough to meet with the reserve officer who is in charge of planning all military funerals, a job he initially didn't think would ever really have to be called in for because it only happens in emergencies. And on October 7th, he realized it was an emergency when he was called in, and he didn't realize the volume of funerals that they would be doing on that day. When you visit Har Herzl, you see the cemetery is very uniform. A military cemetery all sort of looks the same. But as you traverse it, there are lots of empty areas. And sadly, it always looks a little different every time you go because they've opened a new section, something Israel unfortunately is very familiar with. And they've had to open several new sections since October 7th. And being down there in the military cemetery where the soldiers are buried, not the heads of state, these are regular soldiers, seeing their pictures of their faces that their families and friends have left on their graves, their fresh graves, right? You look at that, you see the date, October 7th, October 10th, or whatever it was, that they were either on October 7th or in Gaza that they fell. And you see that their family and their friends have, set up these, tents, the chairs nearby to pray at their graves, and to visit is really like I don't really know how to describe, when you go to visit a grave of a loved one, you kind of think it's like removed from you a little bit. But here at Har Herzl, it never is removed from you. It always feels so raw, even when you visit your friends who have been gone for a long time. For these people, just weeks prior, these photos of these soldiers, these were living young people. And, it's just such a terrible thing that Israel has to deal with on a regular basis, on Har Herzl. And just listening to the officer in charge of the military funerals talk about, his job, where, the military has specific protocols for military funerals. A lot of times families want personalized things or, have specific requests, and, the delicate balance that the Army has to sort of walk this line to be able to conform to the rules, but also give the families what they want in this time of unimaginable tragedy is such a difficult thing. And for me, that was, I think, particularly tough day, even more so maybe than the South. But it was, every time I go, I have to visit Har Herzl, and every time I go, it always looks a little different, even though it's all the same, because of the way the cemetery is laid out.
October 7th or October 8th was like for the cemetery?
Yeah, so on October 7th and October 8th, I mean, the amount of soldiers that, died protecting people, trying to protect people from the attack, the cemetery is sort of overflowing with funerals, and they have to plan them, to make sure that they can accommodate everybody. And that's in Jerusalem, it is normally you wouldn't bury somebody at nighttime, but in Jerusalem you're allowed to bury people at nighttime because it's such a holy city. But they have funerals around the clock every day, on October 8th in particular, where they're having funerals just from dawn to the middle of the night. And and the officer was telling us that one family, an Ethiopian family, in the Ethiopian culture, it's considered like an act of shame to bury someone at nighttime. Like you don't do that, and their funeral was scheduled for nighttime, and they had sort of begged not to do it, and the officer told them that in order to accommodate their request, they would have to move another funeral, and at that point they said no, it's fine, we'll bury it at nighttime because this is we have to do. We don't want to have. No one else should have to experience extra grief more than they needed to. And so even in this unimaginable tragedy, the people of Israel are still very connected to each other and sensitive to each other and one another. And so there are little, like the wildflowers that pop up over the South, there are little bits of hope and little bits of, beauty in these terrible things.
Were there any other activities or any other visits that we went on that were particularly powerful to anyone that haven't been mentioned? Susie.
I'm Susie Mann. I echo everyone's thoughts, feelings, memories along this line. I think we could all talk about every experience we had as being powerful and memorable and impactful. I just want to tell you about our visit to Magan David Adam, which is the Israeli Response Center. I've thought a lot about a woman named Ronit that we met there, and she was one of the first, am I right? One of the first people to receive calls, which is the equivalent, people in Israel dial 101, we dial 911. So she was part of receiving the first calls that came in from the South, and I was very struck, and I remain being struck by the poise with which she not only described but handled that day the calls that she knew she could not respond to. She had no way to send help to the people calling desperately for hope, hiding behind trees, under other bodies, from the music festival in particular. Am I sharing this correctly? And she knew in her heart there was no way that she could send help to them, and she stayed in contact with them. She would call them back. They would call her back begging for help. And here's a woman who I'm sure her job every day is to get the job done, and struggling within herself a conflict, knowing that she could only provide phone support, but in her heart knowing what the tragedy was going to be. She has stuck with me to this day, and the way that the response center did its very best that day, and so much more, so much more.
My name is Talia Nabel, number 7. So obviously we went to show solidarity and to bear witness, and we've gotten the message of what we've seen. One of the things that really struck me, because in addition we went to volunteer, we went to go provide whatever support and resources we could, and what struck me in that was how normal some of it felt, and I think it was Jay who mentioned the resilience in the Israeli people, and the morning before we went to the Nova Festival site and Kfar Aza, we went to go pick avocados. And it was a very early morning, and Rabbi Sorkin had always told us what our light days would be and our heavy days would be. They were all heavy. But there was something wonderful about this early morning drive to the south, and we went to go pick avocados because they needed our help. And it was the first time we heard that boom. And I don't remember how I looked at someone, I'm like, are we gonna just ignore that? And we did. We kept going and provided the support that they needed, and we connected with people, heard their stories, heard what their experiences were, and we were laughing and we were smiling and we were deep under, it's very hard to pick avocados, but we were doing that work. And having been to Israel several times before, obviously this was a very different experience in so many ways, but that felt normal, and it felt hopeful, and it felt like we will get past this. We will get back to that place where we can have those experiences and go with our families and send our children, and we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay, even while we're hearing those thunderous sounds in the background.
Hi, I'm Jane Sachs. It's hard to pick one moment. Those of you who know me know this was the biggest decision of my life, and I'm so glad I made it. Did we talk about tuna? Okay. So some of us who love tuna maybe don't love tuna so much anymore, but we went to, so there's a very common coffee place in Israel called Aroma, sort of like the Starbucks of Israel, but much better coffee. And a lot of the aromas are set up as distribution and creation of sandwiches for the soldiers. And many of us were tasked with the job of making tuna sandwiches. And we put on these plastic gloves, and I said, where's the spoon? No, take the tuna and put it on the bread. And some of us were doing tuna, plop. Some of us were doing tomatoes. Some were doing pickles. Then they were wrapping them and sending them off. And if the soldiers happened to come in and wanted a tuna sandwich, they got them. It was another, that and avocados were the active, let's do something events that really were powerful for me. And I still like tuna.
Okay, we're going to change and shift a little bit in our conversation to talk about what was it that surprised you about being there this time. Kim.
My name's Kim Jolson. I was number 1. Very proud of that. Still number 1 to this day. I echo what everyone said on the panel from the previous question about what we experienced. What surprised me, I think the people we spoke to, especially the people that toured us around the kibbutz, that we went to when we went to a distribution center that was almost set up like a Goodwill that was taking care of the evacuees, how much everyone said, thank you so much for coming. Thank you at the kibbutz for letting us share our story with you. When we were in Sderot, an older man told us his whole story about how he was injured that day. He had his shirt with the bullet hole and his suit that had a bullet hole. He showed us his office that had a missile that came down. It was left, he wanted us to hear his story. It was left how it was that day. So I think what surprised me, that I was inspired. And when people asked me about my trip, I said it was inspiring. It was hopeful because the Israeli people have gathered together to help the evacuees, to help the hostage families. I think that's what I really took away, the feeling of hope and just the feeling that they want us to know their story and to come back and do exactly what we're doing and sharing.
One thing that surprised me, at least a couple of our different speakers asked our group, and how's everything for you in the United States? Because they had seen things like the congressional testimony of the university leaders, and they see these headlines about rising anti-Semitism in America. And all of us, here in our kind of Baltimore bubble, maybe we hear about anti-Semitism, but it doesn't touch us quite as much. And being Americans, we think of our lives as being fairly safe, and Israel is a danger spot. Israel is a kind of dangerous place to live. But these Israelis were saying, oh no, America's also pretty dangerous if you're a Jew, and you should come to Israel because that's where it's safer to be a Jew. So kind of this dichotomy of where is it safer to be a Jew, the area where there is actual physical threat, physical danger in Israel, or of this danger of anti-Semitism in America. So that was very surprising to me that they were actually concerned about our safety in America.
Anyone else that felt surprised by something or struck by something?
I cannot not forget Hirsch's father. We met.
Cousin.
Was his cousin? I thought, okay. Anyway, Hirsch's cousin. All these hostages are all. They're the ages of my grandchildren, and it's hard to accept it. But the plea was, please bring Hirsch home. And you could see that he has faith, that he has to believe that Hirsch is alive, and that Hirsch will come home. Another thing I wanted to, and this is on a scary note, and I want to pronounce Avi's name correctly.
Malamed.
We had a speaker, and this is what is extremely frightening. The bottom line is Avi, who has come to Hizakamuna, he is an activist. I have his credentials here. He told us that Iran, with its tentacles, its ever-present tentacles, are going out to are over all these countries, and they're over Hamas, and they're over Hezbollah, and they're over ISIS, and it's scary. It's very scary that they hold the strings to all these countries, and they're in no hurry. He said, they're in no hurry. They will, in time, and as time goes by, they will be telling who should do what and when, and very, very scary. And Avi will be coming to Baltimore again, and I advocate that Beth El, maybe in conjunction with Hizakamuna, or Beth El on its own, make arrangements to hear this individual. He has written books. I have his credentials, but I think it would behoove all of us to hear an Avi speak here.
Rita, we can make that happen. Okay, I see Lisa's hands up, but I want to ask a slightly different question, which is, what's one thing that you now know that you didn't know before? Yeah, Talia.
A lot, but so one of the things that in going on a solidarity mission, I kind of had this pause of, are we going to just look and just see? And we did a song moment with some rabbis and some cantors in Israel, and one of them made a comment to us that they need us there to be able to see the things that they can't see because they're living it. And it was a perspective that I had not thought about before, that this is their life and they have to move on and they have to be able to go on the day-to-day. So they have A lot of them have not gone to see Kfar Aza. A lot of them have not gone to all the different places and spoken to the people that we have, not because it's not necessarily accessible to them, but they can't allow themselves to go there. They're not going to be able to come back from that. So it was a twist for me, and I've shared that with people since coming back, that if you have an opportunity to go, if you have an opportunity to see it for yourself, to be able to then come back and be the voice for the people who can't be that voice, that was something I hadn't really processed before.
Well, I just want to echo what everyone else has said about all the various topics, and sort of to build a little bit on what Talia said. I was really struck by how, as each person would speak to us, each speaker would say, and on October 7th, and they would give the stories, and it made me think of my parents when they would talk about Pearl Harbor, about us during 9/11, you know, where we were, what was happening. Of course, the stakes for them being so close to what was happening and all the casualties, certainly extremely high and very grave. One of the things that I was also struck by is their appreciation for us just coming, being there, and as we would talk to all of them and they would share their stories, I would hear all of us saying pretty much the same thing, like, we're going to be coming back and we're going to be telling people what's really going on there. They're aware of the misinformation that is pervading really the narrative and has taken over the narrative, sadly. And so we all know our job is going to be to share with people we know, our politicians and influencers, what really happened and what is happening. And I agree with Talia. I'm not sure everybody can get to Israel, but certainly please make your voices known and let people know, because the people of Israel are depending upon us to be out there for them.
Thank you, Lisa. We're going to open things up now to a Q&A, because I'm imagining that many of you have questions that we might not even have covered or anticipated. So is anyone interested in asking a question to anyone on our panel or to our panel? Yeah, Terry.
I'm happy to hear that you're inspired and you came back with hope. My feeling would be, if I saw that, I would be so angry and just mad at the whole situation. And so did you have that feeling when you know, that anger and that, I don't know, I'm surprised to hear nobody really said they were angry. I mean, it's a horrific thing, but even when I listen to you, I'm getting angry myself, and I want to feel hopeful, but how do you deal with that emotion?
I see Susie and Josh. Yeah. Josh, then Susie.
Yeah, I think, I know personally for me it was immense anger. I know for all of us it was certainly at different times. But I think in the people that we spoke to and the meetings that we had, there was an effort to try to balance that with the realities of this incredibly long challenge we all have in trying to work through some major issues here. We met with some different types of peace activists. We met with an Arab-Israeli, Palestinian woman from the West Bank. We met with another pretty vocal peace activists. And some of those were very challenging for me based on how I stand on it and based on the anger that I did have. But it was an eye-opener, and I think it is important to be able to look at it from all the different perspectives and try to understand, as came up a lot, which we haven't yet talked about, is the day after, right? What's next? What happens the day after? What do things look like? What does the future look like? Revenge, anger, how we deal with that, how we deal with everything that happened, how we work through that personal anger and for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel. But there's a reality to then what? And so I think that sort of maybe has you step back for a second and take maybe a big picture view of how challenging that's going to be and how we all have to, I don't want to say keep emotions in check, because I don't think that's fair, and I don't think we should have to do that at all. But I think being realistic with the long-term challenges that remain and will remain. And for me, that sort of stuck with me, and that challenge is still there. One of the speakers, she has been working for, 15 or 20 years, the Hartman Institute, to try to bring peace between the Palestinians and the Jews. And she said, yes, I believe it's a just war, but we need to talk, but we need to get together. And I had a real personal issue with how are we talking to these people and why? I still have that issue, but I also know it's going to happen somewhere, somehow. The Palestinian, the West Bank woman, Arab Israeli we met, wouldn't say it was a just war, was not proud of what happened, did not support what happened, but also was coming from a very different perspective. Personally, I had a very tough time with that too, but they were important perspectives to hear of. There are so many different viewpoints, and depending on where you're sitting and what you're looking at through your lens in life and in the situation and the history of it, it is extremely complex. And so I think just a challenge of dealing with anger and emotion.
I think anger is what got me to go. I've been experiencing anger like so many of us since October 8th. Maybe the 7th was more shock. So for me, the trip was less full of anger than it was full of curiosity and empathy and inspiration. I have so much anger in me, and yet I didn't tap into it while I was there. It wasn't my first emotion. I've got more of it back now, probably fueled also by what we saw. But I think your question's a really valid one, because it could have easily gone that way, but the hope, watching the community centers that we dealt with and the way that the Israelis rallied, it was almost like, for me, it just put my anger on the shelf for that time.
I saw Susan's up first, and then we'll go to Joyce, and then Kira.
I'm curious to how the people feel if they're angry at the intelligence, if they're angry that it happened. I'm curious, the country was so divided before this, how they feel about that. And I'm curious, what is the feeling about Netanyahu?
So I think that sort of like ties into the previous question. The people, I think, of Israel are yes, angry, and there is a lot of erosion of trust in the government apparatus. But I think for them, there's just not time for them to be angry right now. Like, they don't have that. They need to focus on other things. There's going to be time for anger later. There's going to be a commission. The government will get fired. Everything, like, it's going to be very similar, I think, to what happened after the Yom Kippur War. You know, the commission that was set up after that, it toppled the government. And to your question about, previously, before October 7th, Israeli society was very fragmented. There was a lot of protests internally. You did not see that while we were there. Those divisions seem to have sort of melted away because there's something greater than those divisions, than politics. And it's the people of Israel and the state of Israel needing to be together and to be unified. And that's really what you see. So yeah, I think that people are really, upset at the government, and there are, a lot of questions about the intelligence failures and, all the other things. And there's going to be time for that, but that's not, the time for that is not right now. You just don't see it. You see really a beautiful blending of society from, Haredi all the way to secular, all different Arabs in Israel, all different kinds of people really coming together to support the state and to support the people. There will be time for anger, but it's not now.
Just one thing. You mentioned the judicial protests. A lot of the community organizing that we saw was an outgrowth of some of these protests that had been going on for months and months. They were already networked. They had all these contacts, and on October 7th, that day, they were talking to each other and saying, how can we get together and help? And the outgrowth of these people getting together day after day to protest the government, they grew into this community that was able to help others around them.
The next question, I think, was Joyce, Sue, okay. Okay. Sue just asked everyone's question. Bruce.
Can you tell us about those yellow cards?
Yeah.
Tell us about one of these.
Yep. Can someone speak to the yellow cards that came from the Hamal that said honored guests?
So the yellow cards, this was what Kim had mentioned. We went to go visit a facility that was set up to provide resources for the people who had been displaced from their homes on October 7th and afterwards, and to provide them with the dignity of being an honored guest. Like they're being put up in hotels, they are being treated like they should be treated. Going through that situation, they were able to come in and shop for free, take whatever they needed. The cards that they had, they could go into different restaurants, they could go into different facilities, and they would know that that was not only a safe place for them, but there was a place that they would be able to be treated well and provided with support. Some more.
And this was a private concern, it wasn't from the government, correct?
It was not. It was not. Yeah.
So one of the things that that happened on October 7th was that the government was sort of caught off guard, to say the least, right? And what happened, which was magnificent, while the government was figuring things out and reorganizing, was that the people stepped in. And, you know, as the man at Hamal told us, this, you know, this organization that Talia was just talking about that popped up, you know, the attacks started at 6:30 a.m. By 10:30, they had found a space in Jerusalem. By 11:30, they had hundreds of volunteers. By 12:30, they had like collected things for people in need, right? Like, so within hours, even though the government had failed to protect their people and take care of them, the people of Israel stepped in and they did the unimaginable. They were extraordinary, and they held that space until the government was able to come back and to function and to take care of some of those things. But some of these civil society initiatives are still going strong. And one of the things that we didn't talk about was a visit that we made to an organization called Brothers and Sisters for Israel, which initially functioned as Brothers in Arms and then turned to Brothers and Sisters for Israel. And they were doing quite extraordinary things on every front in terms of responding to human need. Arthur, and then, yeah.
How can we support the economy of Israel? I, Israel.
Some of the organizations, such as Brothers and Sisters that Rabbi Sorokin just mentioned, I think they had a link, and there's some other places we went to which we could share. But I will say this, which was mind-blowing. We went to a think tank, talked about two major issues. One was social media, which is a long discussion of how difficult and how insidious it is everywhere and how it's impacting everything, as we all know. They have people that are studying that and working in conjunction with the Israeli government to study that. The other part was on the economy. So just very briefly, I was shocked to learn that tourism accounts for 2.5% only of the Israeli economy, and that the tech sector is so strong and so powerful that, not that we shouldn't be supporting the economy, but they're actually doing pretty well, all things considered. Depending on whether a northern front opens up or not, the economy was incredibly strong, incredibly robust, and when soldiers go and then come back, they just open up their laptops and they're back at work. There's not a factory to get up and running, generally speaking, because tech is so pervasive in the economy. So the numbers, while not great and are being impacted for sure, are not as devastating as I certainly thought, and I think all of us thought. And I will say, with regards to where to give money, and maybe this is an email that may get sent out separately, maybe that's what we should do. I'm not sure who it was. They mentioned they have 90 duffel bags from the U.S. that haven't even been opened, right? Was that in Jerusalem, I think? Right? So just watch what you send, I guess, and where you're sending what to, because he was like, if you want 90 duffel bags filled with clothing and goods from New Jersey and America and whatever, we don't need them. We have too many. So just be aware of where the needs really are or not. I think in the first 10 days, there was warm clothing needed for the soldiers, for sure. They're past a lot of that stuff. I saw an email the other day asking for some more clothing, and I was like, I don't know, they're still bringing clothing over based on what we saw. So just that, I would just caution everyone on that.
And then also just we went to the Magen David Adom headquarters. That's a great organization to give money to because it is not a government organization. They rely heavily on donations. So if you're feeling really like into something that you know your dollars are going to count, Magen David Adom is a really good organization to do that because they rely on donations to continue operating because not part of the government.
And just, Arthur, an addendum to what Josh and Ben said is that, you know, relatively minor dollars in terms of tourism and donations, frankly, relatively minor in terms of what comes from the American Jewish community to Israel. What is significant, major, and hugely important are the dollars that come from the American government to the state of Israel, right? So we know right now that American dollars are paying for about a fifth the cost of the total war. Hugely significant. So we have to make sure, as citizens of America, that the government continues to support Israel in its struggle.
Art.
And they were shocked from what I read. And they described just a little bit. And I was wondering what your impressions, were you so shocked at the atrocities that were mentioned that it just absolutely was beyond your imagination?
And I think, Art, to respond to that, what Rachel was saying earlier was that I'm going to give you an example from Kochav, which is who she had referenced, a woman named Kochav who was doing she was doing information gathering and data collection for the sexual crimes that were committed on October 7th. And again, that was in response to sort of the world saying, prove it, right? We don't believe it. It's AI generated. You know, do you have evidence? And I think in some ways, like I had asked her at one point, can you tell us information, like are there details that we should know, like outside of that article that ran in the New York Times that did actually list many of the atrocities? And she looked at us and she started to cry. And she said, I cannot and I will not tell you those details because no human being should ever have to hold them. And I wouldn't want you to need to know how evil people are and how evil the atrocities were. So we did not meet with the Zaka folks who are doing the body collecting and identification. Rafi actually did do that, not on our trip, but he went on a separate trip. Raf, do you want to respond to that?
In what way were you looking for? Like what? I mean, from a personal experience, I mean, we've all seen death. And we've seen wars in the United States. The United States has been in 3 wars now in my lifetime. But when I read what was going on here, meaning Israel, it shocked me. I had to sit back in my chair after reading the article. The description actually made my hair on fire. So I was wondering. So there are a few things. One is when you speak to therapists who have been doing their, Natal, the Israel Trauma Coalition, Iran, all amazing organizations doing work with people who need therapy, the therapists actually need therapy at this point. So that's one thing to note, that they've never experienced anything like that. In terms of Zaka, I mean, when Dana and I
Israel during the Second Intifada, Zaka came to more prominence then because what they do is they prepare the bodies for burial. They will literally scrape every bit of blood off of pavement and the walls and things that they, to make sure that the body parts are assembled appropriately for burial. And the work they do is beyond holy work. And the people with whom we spoke had also never experienced, with suicide bombers, they just blow themselves up. But this was person to person, personal. And they certainly never experienced anything like that. And they didn't want to talk about it like she said. They couldn't articulate it beyond the horror itself.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to add one thing to your question. Our itinerary was changing on the fly. One day, I think it was Wednesday, we were there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We were scheduled on the initial itinerary to go to a regional forensic center. And I asked a question about whether that was a regional center or a national center. It turns out because our schedule was so hectic that we didn't get a chance to go to that forensic center. But I think that that would have been the opportunity to get into the kind of thing that you're asking about. But unfortunately, time was just not on our side.
Yeah, another question.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you for going and bearing witness and coming back and talking to us. As someone who has a daughter and son-in-law, my son-in-law is serving in the North as a reserve officer. My daughter has 3 children, lives in Tel Aviv, has lived through most of this, and I have sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws that live in Ashkelon that had to be displaced for over a month. So you going there and supporting them is very important. My question is, and I heard from many of you say, you want to bear witness, you want to come back, and as a group, when you came together, and Rabbi, you kind of addressed this a little bit, the next step, as far as supporting Israel in the broader sense. And I guess I've been very frustrated, not so much, I don't know, my anger is sort of there or whatever, but I do the things writing, the letters, and I get back these form letters from the senator, and I'm just wondering, as a community, are we getting together with other synagogues, other witnesses, coming together and making public? I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. I mean, we all know these things, and it's important to hear them. And I think, I'm glad that we're hearing them, and it's important. But I'm really feeling frustrated, like not heard by our officials, by our elected officials, by the community. And I want to know what the next step is, and not just writing letters, but how can we be more proactive about this?
Thank you. I'm going to turn that to Josh. Before I do, I will say this, though. I have been told by senators that the calls that we make actually matter. So whether you're doing it through APAC, whether you're doing it through 1 min a day as a website, whether you're doing it through the Anti-Defamation League, it doesn't matter. Those calls are really important, even if you know that Senator Cardin is going to give his support to Israel, that Ruppersberger is going to give his support to Israel. It doesn't matter. The calls still get counted and they still matter, so still call them. But I would also say, if you have 1 minute while you're heating up your coffee and you have 4 people that you could call, right now I would call Van Hollen's office. So I think in some ways, like, it's frustrating. That was actually something that the families of hostages said too, right? Like, they are beyond frustrated. They feel like, it was what Elliot said. He's been with Rachel and John Pullen Goldberg, in their home every single day, whose son Hirsch is missing or is kidnapped in Gaza. And they said, like, we've been working at this for 120 days, and we feel like we haven't even moved the needle, that nothing has changed. But I would say that, like, when you have that feeling, push through, make those calls anyway, send those emails anyway, even when you're just getting form letters back. And you know what? It matters. It matters. the media is a whole nother beast, right? I'm going to turn things over to Josh, and I think the questions we're going to talk about a little bit too, Josh, is like, what are we doing?
Just a few quick comments, and then I'll get to the second part. The media, incredibly challenging. I would say Robert Kraft's organization, Stand Up to Jewish Hate, they're coming out with a Super Bowl ad, which is unprecedented. It's going to be hopefully a big deal. It's a big deal from what I've seen so far. They're trying to get out there. There's tons of TV ads already. Where we as a community, much broader than Beth El in Baltimore, has failed completely is the social media, the ads. I don't know why. I keep wondering why a bunch of billionaires don't get together and put it all in a pot and turn it into something big. That's what Robert Kraft is doing, but I feel like there should be more of it. I can't really speak to that. On the protest side, we obviously are not big on that either. I've been involved with AIPAC for 30 years, and early on, even when I was involved with AIPAC on college, it was like, why don't we protest more? And the mindset was, back then, I don't know if it would still be the exact same wording now, was back then it wasn't what was going to move the needle. It was what was going to happen in Capitol Hill. It was what was going to happen in the White House. It was talking to the people that matter and not wasting our time holding up signs in streets, except for a big one in DC like we did, which was and is very effective. But on a regular basis, not shutting down highways. That's just traditionally not been our MO as the Jewish community. You can argue its effectiveness or not. Again, can't speak to whether that should be done now based on what they're doing. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I do want to echo what Rabbi Sorokin said about the political side and the frustration with getting a form response back. If you look at the international community, you look at how everyone responded, and again, putting the UN and the sexual crimes aside for a second, there's only one country who did stand with Israel and continues to stand with Israel. That is the United States. End of sentence, okay? Could they be better? Could they be worse? We can argue that all day long. But President Biden, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, has stood by Israel, as has his administration, as has most of Congress, except for the squad and some of the nutbags on the far left. But the reality is that happens from years and years and years of the ridiculous emails and letters and meetings and lobbying and money. Okay, I have been involved in it and given money and written letters to people on the far, far left and the far, far right, Trumpers, non-Trumpers, people pretty close to the squad, anyone who we think could move the needle possibly. And you see, we talk at AIPAC, I'm very involved and on the board of AIPAC locally here in Maryland. We've been working on sort of an insurance plan for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, since after the Holocaust, okay, is when AIPAC started. We just cashed it in right now, okay? Years and years of investment in trying to make sure the U.S. will stand by Israel when it's needed, and it was needed. If the U.S. did not stand by Israel, October 7th, 8th, and since then, this would all be going differently, as Rabbi Schwartz alluded to, with regards to military aid, but even on the sort of international level of support and how that affects the news and media. You think it's not our way now, wait till you see how it would be if the U.S. was completely against us, okay? That is, I believe, 99% the result of what AIPAC does. President Biden has been to Israel probably 25 times, maybe more, because of AIPAC. He's been there, as have most members of Congress. Steny Hoyer, who is a name you probably know local here, he's been, I believe it was 17 times he's traveled to Israel on behalf of AIPAC. You have to go to Israel, experience it, see it, feel it, touch it, to understand it, as a non-Jew especially, to understand what's going on there, understand the dynamic. That's what the organization does, and it makes a big difference and has a very meaningful impact, and it has had that impact right now, and I think that's what's so important to make the difference.
You have to make sure you vote for pro-Israel candidates and that you support pro-Israel candidates. That's one thing we can all do.
So Sue's also saying that you have to make sure that you support pro-Israel candidates, and that's what we do. I want to take a moment here before we turn to our next question, and I think we'll probably have like one or two more questions, to just say that, you know, to your question earlier about Israel advocacy and what we can do, I would say that, you know, in today's Torah portion, Yitro, we see that Moshe is trying to do it all alone. And we see that Yitro comes, his father-in-law, and says, like, this thing that you're doing is lo tovert, it's not good. And then he says, empower the people. And I would say that, right now, it's an us. Like, you all care enough to be here. This group cared enough to schlep to Israel for 4 days and to go morning to night to see hard and challenging things. We have an Israel Affairs group at Beth El. We have a new group of ambassadors at Beth El. We have you all. And so the question is not what does any one of us do, but what do we do together? And we can do anything. Anything is possible. But we just have to know that we are a part of the team of doers and jump into a group. If you care enough to make things happen, then start showing up, start programming, start coordinating Zooms, start coordinating marches, whatever you want to do, or phone banks. But this is our moment. And, the sky's the limit when we work together.
Let me just add, this group will be organizing and coordinating speakers, events, things of that nature. That is a plan we have. Not sure if everyone's aware of it, but that is a plan we have that we're going to do. We are going to be doing more things like this, hopefully having larger crowds, more education, more information, more advocacy. So we do want to make sure we're making a difference and continue to make a difference and keeping the momentum going.
I want to pause for just a moment before we do a question, and I want to just actually ask Rabbi Schwartz in particular. Rabbi Schwartz, going back to Israel this time around, I want to ask you sort of what that experience was like for you, what your biggest takeaways were, and what you would like to see in terms of how we move forward as a community.
Well, it's getting late in the hour here already on a Shabbos afternoon. I mean, I think it's a broad conversation, and maybe we can get into that the next time we get together. I do want to certainly recognize the group and also the Israel Affairs Committee, and we'll be working together as we move forward. Israel right now feels both normal and totally abnormal. So if you're in Jerusalem, you don't know anything's going on. It feels like it's any other day in Jerusalem. It's just fewer people there. If you go to the south, I'm sure if you go to the north, you realize how jarring things have actually been. And I think that getting back to the anger question, I think everyone in the trip returned with a sense of hope. And I think the reason for that is because when you go to Israel, whether it's your 10th time, this time, which is unique in a way, or any other time, you feel the strength, the power, the courage, and the resilience of the Israeli people. That is not diminished one bit. That is not diminished one bit. In fact, I would say it's stronger than ever. So I think that gives all of us hope moving forward.
I just looked at the clock and I see hands raised, and it is 1:40. Okay. Oh, anyone, help. Okay. How about we do 2 quick, right to the point questions and then 2 quick responses. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Bob. Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Oh, goodness gracious. All right, Susan. Susan. Yep. Susan, hold on one sec. We're not doing questions. We're sharing stories. Okay, let's do this. Yep. Good. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so I just want to say a huge thank you. I want to say a thank you to all of our fellow travelers, those who are here today and those who aren't. What you all did was you brought the support of our community to Israel, and now you're bringing the stories of Israel back to our community, and we are so grateful for all of you. So thank you with renewed passion, energy, vigor, and commitment to being a mouthpiece and telling the stories. Thank you to all of you for coming today to listen and for believing in Israel, for standing by Israel, and wanting to hear the stories of Israel. And if you are someone who wants to get involved, if you want to get involved with Israel affairs, where's Jill? Ben? Who should they let know? And is Carrie? Yes. Okay, Carrie, stand up for a minute. Carrie is co-chairing the Israel Affairs Committee with Bob Slatkin, who's not here today, but find Carrie afterwards if you want to get involved. And if you want to keep posted on what the Israel ambassadors are going to be doing, read your Beth El Wednesday emails. All right. Want to wish everyone. Yeah. And there's a Facebook page specifically for the Israel Affairs Committee. Let's rise up and let's end today with Hatikvah. Who's my best singer of the group? All right, Rachel, hired.
Kol od balevav penima nefesh Yehudi amiyah ulfate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia. O lo avta tikvatenu, hatikva bat shnot apayim, liotam chofshi be'artzenu, Eretz Zion Yerushalayim. Liotam chofshi be'artzenu, Eretz Zion Yerushalayim.